His driver has just stopped the car. He does not know why yet. He only knows that somewhere between the instructions he gave 40 minutes ago, take the back road, the one his logistics director described as the fastest route to the distribution site, and this moment something happened that made the driver pull to the side of a red dirt road and sit very still with both hands on the wheel. Emeka Osei does not look up from his phone at first. He is reviewing a column of figures, the kind of figures that would once have made his hands tremble, the kind that now move through his mind like water. 43 billion naira in projected returns. A margin that his board of directors will study with the particular reverence grown men reserve for things they did not believe were possible until someone proved them wrong. He does not look up. And then the driver says very quietly, "Sir." Just that, "Sir." The way you say a word when there are no words after it that will help. Emeka looks up. Through the windshield, past the red dust settling back onto the road, past the line of neem trees with their thin shade, past a woman carrying firewood on her head who has stopped to look at the black car the way you look at something that does not belong. There is a boy. The boy is perhaps 7 years old. He is wearing a yellow shirt that was once brighter than it is now. He is standing in the entrance of a small compound, one hand holding a mango, one hand holding the top of the gate as if he needs it to stay steady, and he is looking directly at Emeka through the glass with an expression so still it does not read as a child's expression at all. And Emeka cannot breathe. Not because of the boy's face, though the boy's face does something to him, he will spend a long time afterward trying to describe and never quite succeed. Because standing behind the boy, her hand appearing now on the boy's shoulder, pulling him gently back from the gate as if she has seen the car and recognized something about it. Standing there in a blue wrapper that Emeka has never seen before, thinner than he remembers, her left hand moving to the boy's shoulder and her right hand lifting slowly to cover her mouth, is a woman he watched them lower into the ground 8 years ago. Go back. You need to go back. You need to understand what kind of man Emeka Osei was before the world broke and reassembled itself into something he did not recognize. He was not always the figure his photograph became. The man in every business magazine photograph, the man with the good suit and the even better stillness, the man who could walk into a room of people who had been talking and cause the entire room to rearrange itself toward him without anyone understanding exactly how it happened. That man was built, the way all such men are built, out of a great deal of pain that got compressed into ambition before it had a chance to stay pain. He grew up in a house where the electricity was a negotiation, not a guarantee. A negotiation between what his father earned driving a long-distance lorry and what the local service provider decided to collect that month. His mother, Mame Acua, was a woman who did not allow her home to look like what it was. This was not pride in the vanishing sense. This was discipline. The floor was swept before anyone left for school. The curtains were washed every second Saturday of the month regardless of what else was happening. A guest arriving in that house would see a woman who had decided that poverty was a circumstance and not a character, and who had decided this so firmly and for so long that the house itself had absorbed the decision and reflected it back at every visitor. His father, Kofi Osei, drove the lorry and came home smelling of diesel and distance and something else that Emeka as a boy could not name and as a man understood was loneliness. His father was not an unkind man. He was a man who had started with a plan and found that the plan did not account for all the variables life turns out to contain, and who dealt with this by going quiet in the places where he might have gone loud. He never raised his hand. He rarely raised his voice. He simply went somewhere inside himself that was harder to reach as the years went on, and Emeka, watching this from the age of 11 or 12, made a private decision that he would never let circumstances compress him into someone unreachable. That he would not let the world make him disappear into himself while other people needed him present. This decision was the beginning of everything. He was good at school the way some children are good at school, not because it came easily, but because he had understood very early that the school was a door and that on the other side of the door was a version of his life that did not involve watching his mother count coins on the kitchen table on Sunday evenings with an expression she thought no one was seeing. He stayed late. He asked the questions other students were embarrassed to ask. He read ahead. He found the one teacher, a man named Mr. Asante, who taught mathematics with the ferocity of someone who believed it was a matter of life, who recognized what was in front of him and began giving Emeka extra problems to solve, harder ones, the kind that required sitting with discomfort for long stretches before the pattern revealed itself. Mr. Asante told him once, leaning over a desk with a red pen in his hand, You do not give up. Most students give up when it stops being pleasant. You sit in the discomfort. That is rare. You understand that about yourself? Emeka was 15. He did not fully understand it yet, but he held onto the sentence. He went to university on a scholarship that required him to score in the top 3 of the national examination. He scored first. His mother stood in the kitchen for a long time when she heard the result, her back to him, one hand on the counter, and when she turned around her face was doing something complicated that she quickly reorganized into the expression she used when she wanted to appear calm. She said, "You see. You see what you can do when you decide to do it." Then she went back to whatever she had been preparing and said nothing more about it, and Emeka understood that this was the highest form of praise available in that particular emotional vocabulary. He treasured it accordingly. University was the place where his brain discovered what it was actually for. He had thought he was good at mathematics. He turned out to be good at systems. The way things connect to each other. The way a change in one place produces a change 3 places away that nobody anticipated. His lecturers noticed. By the time he was in his final year, he had already begun the thing that would become his first real enterprise, a small logistics coordination business run from a single room with 3 phones and a wall covered in handwritten notes, matching small manufacturers to transporters, charging a modest fee to each side, making both sides money they had not been making before. He was 22 when he made his first significant sum. By 26, the business had grown to the point where he needed to make a decision about what it actually was, whether it would stay small and manageable and his, or whether it would become something that required him to release control of the small and step into the management of something much larger. He chose the larger thing. He was 29 when he met Adwoa. He met her at a function he did not want to attend. A corporate dinner, the kind with too many speeches and not enough substance, held in a hotel that tried too hard to look like it was not trying. He had been invited because his name had begun to appear on the right lists, and he had gone because his mentor at the time, an older businessman who gave advice in the form of stories that took a while to understand, had told him that you must show up to the places where the right people are before you know they are the right people. He was standing near a window with a glass of water. He did not drink, had never drunk, a choice he had made at university and kept without ceremony, when a woman walked past him, not toward him, past him, moving in the direction of the door with the particular walk of someone who has decided to leave a party earlier than expected and is doing so without apology. She had a folder under one arm. She was wearing a dress the color of a clear night, and her hair was pulled back simply, and she was looking at the door, not at the room. Something about her looking at the door and not at the room made him turn. He said nothing. He did not know why he turned. He was not a man who spoke to strangers at functions. He was a man who arrived, assessed, made the connections that were useful, and left. But he turned and then, because she had slowed slightly near the door as if reconsidering, he said, "Is the conversation outside better?" It was not a line. He heard it come out of his mouth and understood that it was not a line. It was an honest question. She turned and looked at him for a moment before answering, and in that moment he noticed that she was not calculating her response the way many people do. She was actually considering it. She said, "The conversation outside is with myself. The conversation in here is with 30 people who keep saying the same 3 things. So yes, outside is better." He said, "I have been told this event is important for my career." She said, "Who told you that?" He said, "A man who gives advice in the form of stories." She said, "Did the stories help?" He said, "Some of them." She said, "Then maybe come outside and see if the quiet helps too." He followed her outside. Her name was Adwoa Mensah. She was 31 years old, 2 years older than him, and she worked as a senior auditor for a firm that examined the books of companies very much like his. She was precise in the way certain people are precise, not as a defense but as a form of respect for the people she was speaking with. She said what she meant. She asked questions that were better than most people's answers. She drank her tea without sugar and said that she had tried it with sugar once and could not understand why anyone would want to obscure the actual taste of the thing. He found this deeply interesting. He told her so. She looked at him and said, "Most people find it odd." He said, "Most people are not paying attention." She looked at him for a moment longer than was necessary and then looked at the city lights spread out below them and said, "All right then." That was how it began. They were married 14 months later in a ceremony that his mother presided over from a chair of honor, while wearing the dress she had been saving for a good occasion since his father's second posting. His father cried. Emeka had not known his father could cry. He stood next to Adwoa in the receiving line and felt something in his chest that he had no word for. Not happiness exactly, though happiness was there, but something larger than happiness, something that had to do with the specific feeling of arriving somewhere you did not know you were traveling toward until you could see it from the inside. Their life together was the kind of life that looks, from the outside, like a particular kind of luck. But from the inside it was built, daily, out of the specific choices of two people who had decided to pay attention to each other. Adwoa continued working. This had been her condition, not negotiated as an ultimatum but stated as a fact about who she was, and Emeka had understood it as a fact about who she was and had never tried to change it. She brought the precision of her professional mind home with her and applied it to everything, to their budget, to their calendar, to the way they argued, which was always within a set of boundaries they had not agreed to explicitly but both understood completely. No cruelty. No scorekeeping. No withdrawing. You said the thing and then you stayed in the room with the person you had said it to. Their home was not large at first. It was the right size. A flat on the third floor of a building in a neighborhood that was neither wealthy nor poor, that had wide enough roads and a bakery on the corner that smelled of sugar and hot fat every morning at 6 o'clock. Adwoa had chosen it. She had gone to see 12 flats before choosing this one, and she had chosen it for one reason she explained to Emeka by pointing out the window. You can see the bakery. On difficult mornings, the smell of it will remind you that someone got up very early and made something good. That is not nothing. He married the right woman. He knew it every day. Adwoa became pregnant in the 3rd year of their marriage. She told him at the kitchen table on a Tuesday morning. She was eating toast. She said it the way she said most things, directly, without preamble, putting the fact out between them like something she wanted them both to be able to look at clearly. She said, I'm pregnant. About 6 weeks, I think. I have an appointment on Thursday. He put his cup down. He sat for a moment looking at her. She was watching him the way she always watched him when she had just said something important, not anxiously, but with the particular attention of someone who wanted to see not his reaction but him. He said 6 weeks. She said, approximately. He said, then approximately 6 weeks ago. She said, yes. He started laughing. She started laughing. The laugh was slightly out of control on both sides, the kind that has relief in it and surprise and something warm that is difficult to look at directly. He came around the table and she stood up from the chair and he held her for a long time while the toast went cold and the morning light moved through the kitchen window. He called his mother that evening. His mother listened to the entire announcement and then said, after a pause, bring her to me before the end of the month. I want to cook for her. This was the highest possible expression of affection in his mother's vocabulary. He told Adwoa. Adwoa understood immediately. The pregnancy was difficult in the 2nd trimester. Adwoa, who was not a person who complained, began to look tired in a way that her composure could not entirely conceal. She stopped eating certain things. She slept more. She would sometimes sit in the middle of a sentence and go somewhere inside herself for a moment and then come back and continue as if nothing had happened. He learned to wait during those pauses. He learned that the waiting was the right thing to do. She worked until her 8th month. Her firm allowed it because she asked for it and because she was the kind of employee that firms arrange their policies around when it becomes necessary. She came home on the last day before her leave began with a small plant in a terracotta pot. Something with thick green leaves and a single flower, that a colleague had given her. She put it on the windowsill in the kitchen, the same window where the morning light came through, and looked at it for a moment and said, I'm going to miss work. He said, it's 12 weeks. She said, I know what 12 weeks is, Emeka. She did not say it harshly. She said it with a small smile that acknowledged the gap between what he had meant and what she was actually feeling. He was still learning that particular gap. She said, I don't know who I am when I'm not working. That's not a complaint. It's just true. He said, you're the person who found the flat with the bakery window. She looked at him. She sat down at the kitchen table with her hands around a cup of tea and she looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, you remember that? He said, I remember everything about you. She looked at the plant in the window. She said, all right. The call came at night. Emeka was at an event. Not the kind of event he enjoyed, a government reception, the kind attended out of obligation and navigated with the particular social precision that people in his position learn because the alternative is worse than the attendance. He was standing with a glass of water, which was what he always held at these events, and he was 3/4 of a conversation about infrastructure investment, which was a conversation he could have conducted in his sleep, when his phone lit up. He looked at it. A number he did not recognize. A number that began with the prefix for the hospital district. He excused himself. He answered. The voice on the line was a woman's, a nurse. He understood from the phrasing, professional and careful in the way medical professionals are careful when they have something to say that they have been trained to say clearly. She asked his name. She confirmed his relationship to Adwoa Osei. And then she said, there has been an emergency. Your wife was brought in this evening. She paused and then said, I need you to come to the hospital. Please come now. He was in the car before the call ended. He does not remember the walk from the room to the lobby to the car. He remembers the city lights moving past the window as the driver went faster than traffic usually allowed, taking the routes that a man like Emeka's driver knew to take. He remembers his own hands on his knees and the way he could feel his heartbeat in his throat. He arrived. The nurse at the desk knew his name. They had called it ahead. A doctor met him in a corridor, a young man or a man who looked young, with the particular stillness that certain doctors acquire as a way of managing what their days contain. He told Emeka that Adwoa had collapsed at home, that a neighbor had found her and called for help, that she had been brought in quickly, that the child, a boy born early in the ambulance, had survived and was in the neonatal unit, small but breathing, and that Adwoa. He stopped. He used the phrase that medical professionals use when they want to be precise. He said there had been severe internal bleeding. He said every measure available had been applied. He said that she had not regained consciousness. He said they had done everything. Emeka stood in the corridor and heard all of this and felt the information arrive in him like something poured into a vessel that did not have the right shape to hold it. He asked to see her. The doctor took him. The room was white and quiet and held the particular silence of a place where the machines have just been turned off. She was lying with her hands at her sides, and she looked smaller than she was, and her face was very still, and he stood in the doorway for a moment before going in because some part of him understood that going through the door was irreversible. He went in. He sat down beside her. He took her hand, which was already cooling. He sat there for a long time. He did not cry in the room. He would cry later, alone in the car, and then never again in front of anyone, and that decision, made in the corridor of that hospital without knowing he was making it, would shape the next 8 years of his life in ways he could not have predicted. He thought, sitting there with her hand in his, about the last thing she had said to him. 3 days before. Not a significant thing. She had asked him, at breakfast, whether he had remembered to confirm the car for Friday, and he had said yes, and she had said good, and they had eaten the rest of breakfast in comfortable quiet. He had not known that was the last thing. He did not get to say what he would have said if he had known. The boy was named Kweku. Emeka named him Kweku, which was a name from his own mother's family. The name given to boys born on a particular day of the week, a tradition his mother had kept and her mother before her. He held the baby in the neonatal unit with hands that he had never thought of as large until they were around something this small, and he looked at his son's face for a long time, and something that was not grief exactly, something adjacent to grief but turned in a different direction, settled in his chest. He hired a nurse immediately, and then a second nurse. He was not a person who made decisions slowly, and the decision about Kweku's care was one he made with the particular clarity that comes from grief when grief wants somewhere to go. His son would have everything, not as compensation, not as apology, as provision, as a father's first and most fundamental job. His mother came within 48 hours. She arrived at his home without calling ahead, which was the first time she had ever done so, and she cooked for 3 days, filling his freezer with containers labeled in her handwriting, and she held Kweku with the ease of a woman who has held many babies, and she said very little about any of it because she understood that her son needed her presence, not her words. On the 3rd day, before she left, she sat with him in the kitchen in the early morning and she said, "She loved you well." He said, "Yes." His mother said, "You will feel this for a long time. That is not a problem." That is what it means when it was real. He said, I know. She said, you will raise this boy. You will raise him well. And she will know. He looked at his mother and something moved through him that he could not name and did not try to. He nodded. His mother finished her tea and stood up and began to prepare to leave, moving through the kitchen with the particular efficiency of a woman who has places she is needed and no time for sentiment to delay her. She paused at the door and said, call me every Sunday. He said, I will. She said, not some Sundays. Every Sunday. He said, every Sunday. She left. He rebuilt himself. This is the most honest way to describe what happened in the year after Adwoa died. He did not heal exactly. He did not recover in the sense the word usually implies. He rebuilt. He took the rubble and found what was still structural and he built on top of it. And what he built was a version of himself that was more effective in every measurable way and more silent in every unmeasurable one. He worked. The business had been growing before Adwoa died and it continued growing after, because he gave it everything that had nowhere else to go. He expanded into 3 new sectors in the first 18 months. He hired people who were better than the people they replaced. He made decisions with a speed that his board found occasionally alarming and frequently profitable. He became, in the language of those who track such things, a billionaire, a word that landed on him strangely, as words do when they describe something you never fully pictured, when the reality of it arrived more gradually than the word suggests. His mother still cooked. He still called every Sunday. Kweku grew. Kweku learned to walk, to talk, to announce his preferences with a force and specificity that made Emeka want to laugh in the way you laugh when you recognize something of yourself in a person much smaller than you. He was a serious child, observant. He would sit and watch something for much longer than other children his age, and then, when he had decided he understood it, he would reach for it with a confidence that precluded failure as a concept. There were women after several years. Not many. None of them wrong. None of them Adwoa. He did not expect them to be Adwoa. He went through them with the same quiet competence he applied to everything, understanding at some level that he was looking for something and that none of them were what he was looking for and that this was not their failure. He buried Adwoa in a ceremony that was attended by everyone who mattered to both of their lives, and he kept her photograph on the shelf in his study where he could see it when he sat at his desk, and he spoke to her sometimes in that room when no one else was present, telling her things about Kweku, about the business, about his mother, about the things she had missed that she would have had a specific precise opinion about. He did not tell anyone he did this. It was not something he needed anyone to understand. 8 years passed. The logistics director had been describing the new distribution site for 6 weeks. A rural distribution hub, the kind that made no commercial sense until it suddenly made complete commercial sense, the inflection point at which point it became obvious and everyone wondered why no one had thought of it before. The region was underdeveloped in exactly the way that a man who understood systems could see would not remain underdeveloped for much longer. The infrastructure investment had already been confirmed. The roads were coming. The internet towers were going up. The model was ready. Emeka had approved the site visit himself. A personal visit, unusual for him at this stage of the company's scale, but his logistics director had made the case that the community relationships here were sensitive and that a principal-level visit at the start would signal seriousness in a way that a representative could not. He had agreed. He had driven out on a Wednesday, and somewhere on the red dirt road on the way to the site, the driver had stopped the car. He is still sitting in the back seat. His hands, which have been holding his phone, have lowered without his noticing. The phone has gone to sleep. He is looking through the windshield at the entrance of a compound where a boy in a yellow shirt is being drawn gently backward by the hand of a woman who is now partly concealed behind the gatepost. The driver says nothing. He is a man who has worked for Emeka for 4 years, who has navigated the particular loyalty that develops between a driver and a principal he respects, who understands that there are moments in which silence is the only appropriate contribution. Emeka opens the car door. He steps out onto the dirt road. The air is warm and heavy with the smell of red dust and something green and the distant smell of cooking from somewhere inside the compound. He can hear the sound of a generator somewhere nearby and the sound of birds in the neem trees and somewhere down the road the high thin sound of children playing. He stands on the road and does not move toward the gate and does not move back toward the car. The woman behind the gatepost has not moved either. For a long moment, The road between them holds everything. All 8 years. All of the grief that built and then compressed into something else. The Sunday phone calls with his mother. The shelf in his study. The conversations in the empty room. The boy is looking at him. The boy has his father's eyes. Emeka knows this because his mother has told him that he has his grandfather's eyes, and his grandfather's eyes were the same eyes now looking at him from across a dirt road in a quiet village on a Wednesday afternoon in a year he had not expected to contain anything like this. The woman steps out from behind the gatepost. She is wearing a blue wrapper. Her hair is shorter than he remembers. She is thinner in a way that is not a weight thing but a life thing, the kind of thinness that comes from years of a particular kind of effort. She has a small scar near her left eyebrow that was not there before. She is looking at him with an expression that has several things in it at once, and he cannot read them in the order they are arranged because his mind is doing something it has never done before, which is refuse to process what his eyes are presenting it with. She says his name. Not loudly. She says it the way you say a word you have been keeping somewhere private for so long that saying it out loud is a different kind of act than saying any other word. She says, Emeka. And he stands on the road and his chest does something that he has no word for. A pressure that is not pain exactly, or is pain exactly but a kind she has not specified, a pain that contains too much to be only pain, and he puts his hand over his mouth the way he has only done once before, in the corridor of a hospital, and a single thing runs down his face before he can stop it, and he stands there on the road with his hand over his mouth and looks at her across 8 years of a grief he built a life inside. Her name was Adwoa. He had buried someone else. This is the thing he will not understand for several days. That the woman he buried, the woman he sat with in a white room with her hands growing cold, the woman he named his son without knowing was not the mother of his son. That woman was someone else. Someone whose face in that bed, in the stillness of death, in his own shock, he had not looked at as carefully as he thought he had. Someone who had been brought in the same evening, to the same hospital in similar circumstances. An administrative failure of the kind that should not happen and that happens, and that the hospital had discovered within 48 hours and that by then Emeka, unreachable in his grief, protected by his money and his silence and his driver and his closed door, had not been reached by. He will not understand all of this immediately. He will understand it in pieces, over the days after this Wednesday, as Adwoa speaks and as documents are found and as the shape of what happened 8 years ago slowly assembles itself in front of him. But right now he is standing on the road, and she is standing at the gate, and the boy is between them. She says, I know what you are thinking. I know what this looks like. I have been trying to reach you for. She stops. She takes a breath. Her right hand, the one not on the boy's shoulder, presses flat against the gatepost. She says, I have been trying to reach you for a very long time. He says, how? It is not an accusation. It is the only word available to him. She says, come inside. She says it to the road, not to him, and then she turns and takes the boy back into the compound and leaves the gate open. He stands on the road for another moment. He goes inside. The compound is small and clean with the specific cleanliness that comes from someone who cares for a space the way his mother cared for their home when he was young. Not because visitors would see it, but because the care itself was the point. There is a small garden to the left of the main entrance, not decorative but functional, with the kind of plants that produce things. Tomatoes staked to thin poles, a pepper plant heavy with fruit, something leafy and green near the wall. Someone tends it regularly. You can see from the way the soil is turned. The veranda has 2 plastic chairs and a small table with a water jug on it. There is a mat on the ground near the door with a pair of children's shoes placed neatly at its edge. Small red shoes with the Velcro straps fastened. The shoes are worn but clean. She sits in one of the chairs. The boy has gone inside the main room, but Emeka can see him through the window, sitting on the floor with something in his hands, watching the veranda with the particular attention of a child who has decided to be invisible while remaining entirely visible. Emeka sits in the other chair. For a moment, neither of them speaks. It is the first silence they have shared in 8 years, and it has a different weight from every silence they shared before. It has the weight of everything that happened inside it. She says, his name is Kofi. She says it simply, directly, the way she said everything. She says, I named him for your father. Something moves across Emeka's face. He looks at the window where the boy is sitting. He looks for a long time. She says, I know how this sounds. I know there is no way I can tell you all of it right now in a way that will make immediate sense. But I need to tell you some things, and I need you to listen to me the way you used to listen to me, and then... She presses her lips together. Then you can say whatever you need to say. He says, tell me. She says, when I woke up in that hospital, you were not there. The nurse told me you had already... She stops. She presses her hand flat on her thigh. She says, they told me there had been a mistake. Terrible mistake. And that by the time anyone understood what had happened, you had already... She says the word quietly, buried her. She says, I asked for you. For days. The nurses had a number. The number was disconnected. I had no way to reach your office. I was in a room in a hospital in a district I did not know with a newborn baby and no phone, and the only number I had was for our home. And when I called our home, someone answered who was not you, who said that Emeka Osei did not live there anymore, that the family had moved. He says, we moved. After he does not finish. She says, I know. She says, I tried to find you. For the first 2 years, I tried every way I knew. I went to people who knew people. I wrote letters to the company address and received no replies. She stops. Her jaw tightens and then releases. She says, at a certain point, I began to think that perhaps you had been told about the mistake and had decided. She does not complete that sentence either. She says, I did not know what to think. I did not know what had happened. I only knew that I was here and you were not, and Kofi needed to eat and I had no money and I had to. She pauses. I had to build something. He says, what did you build? She looks at him. She says this. She says it without apology, without self-pity. She says it the way she said everything, as a fact about who she was and where she was and what she had decided. The story of the 8 years takes more than one conversation to tell. It takes 3 days in pieces on the veranda in the early morning before Kofi wakes, in the evening after he goes to bed, in one long conversation on the second afternoon when the rain comes and keeps them both inside and Kofi sits on the floor between them with a book he is reading to himself in a voice too low to hear. She had settled here because a woman she knew from the hospital, a nurse who had found her some clothes and a phone and a small amount of money with the particular generosity that certain people produce in exactly the right moment, had family here. She had come with nothing and been given a small room and had taken in sewing and then more sewing and then had found a market where a woman who made a particular kind of salted fish needed someone to manage the accounting that she had been managing in her head for 20 years with increasing difficulty. Adwoa had audited those accounts in the first week and found 4 places where money was leaking that the woman had never noticed, and the woman had looked at her for a moment and then said, what else can you do? What she could do, it turned out, was considerable. By the 3rd year, she was managing the accounts for 11 market traders in the village and 2 in the next one. She was charging a small fee that she had researched carefully before setting, low enough to be accessible, high enough to be sustainable. She had moved from the small room to this compound, which she rented from a family who had moved to a city. She had enrolled Kofi in the local school, where the teachers were underpaid and the classrooms were overcrowded and the children, including her son, learned anyway with a persistence that she recognized and took quiet pride in. She had not stopped trying to reach Emeka, but the years accumulated. The letters went unanswered. The addresses she had for him became outdated. The company grew so large that finding a way to its principal was a different kind of project from what it had been when she was in the city, when she still had networks to reach through. She had tried. She would say this several times across those 3 days, not as an excuse but as a fact. She had tried for a long time before she had done the thing that kept her going through the nights when the trying felt too much, which was to decide that she would stop trying to reach Emeka and start building the kind of life that she and Kofi could live well regardless of whether she succeeded. She said this on the second morning, holding a cup of tea, looking out at her small garden in the early light. She said, I did not let myself become the woman who sat waiting to be found. That would have been, she paused, that would have been its own kind of death. He looked at her across the small table. She looked back. She said, I am sorry. I know that is not the word you were expecting. He said, you have nothing to apologize for. She said, I have some things to apologize for. We will get to those. He said, what things? She said, I will tell you when I'm ready. And she looked at her garden, and the conversation moved on, and he waited because he had learned how to wait. Kofi came to him on the second evening. He came the way children approach adults when they have made a decision, with a specific directness that does not leave room for hesitation. He walked up to where Emeka was sitting on the veranda in the early dark and stood in front of him and said, "My mother told me that you are my father." Emeka said, "Yes." Kofi said, "She said you did not know about me." Emeka said, "That is true." Kofi considered this. He said, "She also said you are very busy." Emeka said, "I am. But I am here now." Kofi said, "She said that too." He stood for another moment. Then he said, "I have a book about how engines work. Do you want to see it?" Emeka said, "Yes." Kofi went inside and came back with a book. A library book, its spine worn and its pages slightly wavy from being turned too many times by too many small hands. He sat down next to Emeka, close enough that their arms were almost touching, and opened the book to a page and said, "This is the part one don't understand." Emeka looked at the page. He looked at his son, who was looking at the page, who smelled of soap and the red dust of the compound and something sweet that Emeka could not identify, who had the specific seriousness of a child who does not waste attention. He said, "Which part?" Kofi pointed. Emeka spent an hour on the veranda explaining engines to his son with a library book between them and the sound of cicadas starting up in the trees in Adwoa. Somewhere inside, moving through the kitchen with the particular quiet of someone who is listening to something she did not expect to hear. On the third day, she told him the rest. She had not been fully honest with him, she said, in the first months of their marriage. Not dishonest in the way that destroys things, but in the particular way of a person who has been managing difficulty alone for so long that the reflex of concealment has become automatic, invisible even to herself. Her family, she said. Her family situation. She had described her parents to him as distant but present. What she had not described was that her older brother had debts that her parents had been secretly servicing for years by borrowing money from people who were not banks, people who collected with the particular firmness of people who have other methods available to them. She had been sending money home throughout their marriage, not large amounts, not amounts that would have shown easily in their joint accounts, but regular small amounts, a drainage he had never noticed because he had trusted her completely with the household finances and because she was very good with numbers. She had been ashamed of this. Not of her family, of the hiding. She had told herself every month that she would tell him when it was resolved, that she would tell him once there was nothing to tell except the past. But it did not resolve, and she continued hiding it, and the hiding became its own kind of weight that she carried in the specific silence between two people who are very close. She said, "I was going to tell you. I was going to tell you when the baby came. I had decided that when we had the baby I would put everything in front of you, the full amount, the full history, and we would deal with it together. I had practiced what I was going to say. I had an exact version of the conversation in my head." She paused. She said, "And then the ambulance." He sat very still. She said, "I am not telling you this so that it explains anything. I am telling you because you deserve to know the full thing. Not a version of it. The full thing." She said, "I am sorry for that. For the hiding. Even if the rest of it was not my fault, that part was. And I have had 8 years to sit with it." He said, 8 years is a long time to sit alone with something." She said, "Yes." He said, "I wish you had trusted me." She said, "I know. I wish I had too." There was a long silence between them. Not the silence of two people who have run out of things to say, but the silence of two people who have arrived at a place that required everything that came before it to reach, and who are standing in it for the first moment. He said, "What you owe in total." She looked at him. He said, "I want to know what your brother's debt is. In total." She said, "Emeka." He said, "Tell me the number." She told him the number. He said nothing for a moment. Then he took out his phone and sent a message to his finance director. A short message, 3 sentences. He put the phone back in his pocket. She was watching him. He said, "It will be cleared by Friday." She said, "Emeka, you cannot." He said, "It is done." She said, "I cannot accept." He said, "Adwoa." He said her name the way she had said his on the road 3 days ago. Simply, like a word kept somewhere private for a very long time. She stopped. He said, "I am not doing it because it erases anything. I am doing it because it is a problem that can be solved and I have the means to solve it and there is nothing more to discuss." She looked at her hands. He said, "The other things. Those will take longer." She said, "I know." He said, "I know too." His mother was the one he called on Sunday, as he always did. He called her from the compound, sitting on the veranda after Kofi had gone to sleep, while Adwoa was inside and the night sounds had started up and the single bulb above the veranda cast its warm circle on the concrete. His mother answered on the second ring, the way she always did. He said, "Mame." She said, "I'm here." He said, "I have to tell you something." She said, "Tell me." He told her. He told her all of it, in order, the way you tell someone you trust absolutely, leaving nothing out. He heard his own voice going through the events, and somewhere in the middle of it, he heard a sound on his mother's end that was different from the usual sounds of her kitchen, and he paused. He said, "Mame." She said, "I'm here. Continue." He continued. When he finished, she said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, "You have not imagined this." He said, "No." She said, "The boy is real." He said, "Yes." Another pause. He heard her put something down. A cup, he thought, from the sound of it. She said very quietly, "She named him for your father." He said, "Yes." His mother said nothing for what felt like a long time but was probably 30 seconds. Then she said, "I am coming on Saturday." He said, "Mame, you don't have to." She said, "I will come on Saturday." He said, "Yes." "All right." She said, "Emeka." He said, "Yes." She said, "She kept herself. All that time, she kept herself." He said, "Yes, she did." His mother said, "That woman has spine. Her and I will get along fine." He started laughing, and the laugh was slightly out of control, the way it had been in the kitchen 8 years ago on a Tuesday morning, the way laughter is when it has more than one thing inside it. His mother did not join the laughing, but he could hear the specific quality of her silence that meant she was not displeased. She said, "Saturday." He said, "Saturday." The reckoning with the hospital was not a small thing. He sent his lawyers on the Monday, not in anger or not only in anger, but because a wrong had occurred that had structural causes that would produce the same wrong again for someone else who did not have his resources to find their way back from it. He was thorough and he was patient and he was specific in what he asked for, and what he asked for was not compensation and not the destruction of careers but an accounting, a full, documented accounting of how an error of this magnitude had been possible, and a specific set of changes that would make it impossible in the future. The hospital's legal team was initially defensive in the way institutional legal teams are initially defensive when they know they are wrong. Then they read the documentation his team had prepared, which was the documentation of someone who knew exactly what had happened and was not guessing, and they became cooperative in the way people become cooperative when they understand that the alternative is worse. There was a formal apology. There were changes made. Emeka followed up on those changes 12 months later, personally, which surprised everyone and was the specific act of a man who understood that accountability without follow-through is a gesture. The woman who had been buried in Adwoa's place. She had a family. He found them. He sat with them. He did not have words adequate to the situation, but he sat with them and he listened and he provided what he could provide, which was not enough and which he knew was not enough and which he gave anyway. Her mother was a small woman with a straight back who looked at him across a table in a room that smelled of incense and said, after a long silence, "You loved her. The woman you thought she was, you loved her." He said, "Yes." She said, "Then she was loved. Whatever else happened, she was loved. That is not nothing." He sat with that for a long time afterward. Adwoa came back to the city. Not quickly. Not by his insistence. She came because she decided to, on a timeline she set herself, in a way that made sense to her and to Kofi. She enrolled Kofi in a school that had small classes and good teachers and a library that he walked through on the first visit with the expression of someone who has just been shown something they did not know was possible. He ran his hand along the spines of the books the way you touch something you want to make sure is real. He started at the new school on a Monday and came home on Friday with the specific exhaustion of someone who has processed an enormous amount and is ready to report it. He sat at the kitchen table and ate his dinner and told his mother 3 things he had learned, in no particular order. He told Emeka the same 3 things on Saturday morning, standing in the doorway of Emeka's study with his hands in his pockets, and Emeka listened to all 3 things with complete attention, and then asked questions, and Kofi answered the questions with the precision of someone who has been thinking about them since he raised them with his mother the day before. Emeka and Adwoa were not immediately the people they had been. This is the honest truth of it, and it deserves to be said honestly. 8 years is not something that resolves in 3 days on a veranda or in a single cleared debt or in a telephone call to a mother on a Sunday night. 8 years is its own geography, and the two of them had been navigating entirely separate geographies, and the work of learning each other again, not learning the people they had been, but learning the people they had become, was a different kind of work from any they had done before. She was different. He was different. She had built something alone that she had not needed him to build, and that fact was true and was good and was also, in the particular emotional calculus of two people rebuilding trust, a complication. He had built a life around her absence, around her photograph on a shelf, around the Sunday phone calls and the conversations in the empty room, and that absence had been both a wound and, in some ways he was only beginning to admit, a companion. An absence is, in its own way, safer than a presence. Presence demands things, makes mistakes, changes over time, has opinions about the temperature of the room and the way the groceries are arranged and the particular phrasing of a decision that needed to be made differently. Presence is a person. There were evenings in those early months when the two of them sat in the same room and felt the specific discomfort of two people who know each other very well from a long time ago and who are still finding out whether that knowledge applies to who they are now. There were conversations that started clearly and went somewhere neither of them had expected. There were moments of warmth, genuine, unmistakable, the kind that arrive without warning and that feel like a window opening in a room that has been closed too long. And there were moments after those moments of warmth when they both went slightly careful, slightly protective, as if they did not fully trust the warmth yet. He was patient in a way that cost him something. She could see it costing him, which made her more patient in return, which he could see, and which he took as the specific form of grace it was. They went, separately and then together, to a counselor recommended by a doctor they both trusted. She said this was necessary before he could suggest it. He agreed immediately. The counselor was a woman who said very little in the first session but listened with a quality of attention that both of them recognized and trusted, the quality of someone who does not need the story to end the way stories usually end, who is interested only in the specific truth of this particular situation. It was in the counselor's office, in the fourth session, that Emeka said the thing he had not been able to say on the veranda or on the phone with his mother or in any of the conversations that had come before. He said, "I am angry." He said it to the counselor, not to Adwoa, which was the right way to say it. He said, "I know the logic of what happened. I understand it. I know who is responsible and who is not responsible. I have placed the responsibility correctly in each place." But underneath that, he stopped. He looked at the window. He said, "I am angry that you were alive and I did not know. I am angry at 8 years. I am angry that Kofi grew up without." He did not finish. He put his hand over his mouth for a moment. Then he put his hand down. He said, "I am not angry at her. I want to be clear about that. I am angry at what happened. But the anger has to go somewhere and sometimes it is going in the wrong direction." The counselor said nothing. Adwoa said after a moment, "I know." Emeka looked at her. She said, "I know where the anger goes sometimes. I feel it too. Not at you. Just the same anger at the same 8 years. The same." She pressed her lips together. The same grief for what Kofi did not have. They sat with that. In the counselor's office on a Wednesday afternoon, with the sound of traffic outside and the light coming through the window at a specific angle that made the room feel warmer than the room temperature. They sat with it together, which is not the same as resolving it. But it is the beginning of the same process. His mother arrived on a Saturday as promised. She arrived early, which meant she had left very early, which meant she had not slept much, which meant she had considered this visit worth that particular cost. She arrived with a bag that was heavier than a bag for a weekend visit, and Emeka recognized immediately that she was planning to stay longer than a weekend. He did not comment on this. She walked into the kitchen, where Adwoa was standing making tea, and she put her bag down and she stood very still for a moment and looked at Adwoa. Adwoa looked back at her without turning away. His mother said, "I brought egusi, the kind you dry properly. You will not find that quality here in this city." Adwoa said, "I know which kind you mean." His mother said, "Come and show me where the pots are." That was all. That was the entire reunion. But Emeka, watching from the doorway, understood everything it contained. He understood the egusi, which was not about soup. He understood the pot question, which was not about pots. He understood the standing still and the not turning away. He understood his mother's particular version of forgiveness and welcome, which never announced itself and never had to. He went and got Kofi. He brought Kofi to the kitchen doorway and said, "There is someone who wants to meet you." Kofi stood in the doorway and looked at his grandmother, who turned and looked at him, and for a long moment grandmother and grandson regarded each other with the mutual assessment of two people who have heard about each other and are now forming a direct opinion. His mother said, "You have your father's eyes." Kofi said, "I know. My mother told me." His mother said, "Come here, then." He went. She put her hand on his head, which she did with all children she decided to love, a gesture that was half blessing and half claim. Kofi stood very still under her hand with the expression of someone receiving something they did not know was coming and have decided to trust. His grandmother said, "Your grandfather would have liked you very much." Kofi said, "Why?" She said, "Because you look at things for a long time before you touch them." He did the same. Kofi considered this. He said, "Did you love him?" She said, "For 40 years, yes." He said, "What happened to him?" She said, "He drove long distances for many years, and at the end of the distances he was very tired. So he rested." Kofi said, "Is that a way of saying he died?" She said, "Yes." He said, "My father says it is good to say the exact true thing." She looked at Emeka across the kitchen, a quick look, and then back at her grandson. She said, "Your father is right. I will use the exact true words from now on." She said, "He died. And I was very sad. And then time went on, and I kept doing the things that needed doing, and the sadness became something I carried rather than something that carried me. Do you understand the difference?" Kofi said, "Yes." She looked at him. She said, "I think you do." She went back to asking about the pots. The garden Adwoa had made in the compound in the village. She was thinking about it in those early months in the city. Emeka found her at the kitchen window one morning, looking out at the city with the expression he recognized from years ago, the expression she used to describe as being between two places. He said, "What are you thinking about?" She said, "My garden." He said, "The one in the compound." She said, "The tomatoes will need to be picked. The woman who was looking after things while I was here, she cannot water the pepper plant the right way. She overwatered the last one." He said, "We can send someone." She said, "It is not about the plants." He said, "I know." She said, "I built something there. It is not the same as what I had here before. It is not better or worse. It is different. And She stopped. She said, "I want you to understand that I am not unhappy here. That is not what I am saying." He said, "I know that too." She turned from the window. She said, "I need to go back and close it properly. Properly in my own way. Not leave it open like a question I walked away from." He said, "When do you want to go?" She said, "Next month. The three of us." He said, "Kofi has school." She said, "I know. He can miss 3 days." He said, "All right." He said it without hesitation. She looked at him for a moment, and the look had something in it that was not quite surprise but was adjacent to it. The look of a woman reassessing a man she knows very well against the version of him she has been quietly bracing herself to find. He saw the look. He said, "I told you. I remember everything." She said, "You told me that." He said, "It was still true." She turned back to the window. After a moment she said, "The plant is still alive. The one from the flat. The one my colleague gave me." He said, "I know." She looked at him. He said, "I moved it to the study. I kept it. It is on the windowsill next to your photograph. It has been there for 8 years." She was very still. He said, "I could not bring myself to let it die. I do not have your instinct for plants, but the nurse who came in for Kweku, she knew how to manage it. She watered it every week. I asked her to keep it going." Adwoa said nothing for a long time. Then she said quietly, not quite toward him, "You kept the plant." He said, "Yes." She put her hand over her eyes for a moment. Just one moment. Then she took it away and she was composed again, the way she was always composed, with the specific composure of someone who has decided that composure is a discipline and not a suppression. She said, "All right." He said, "All right." They went back to the village. The three of them drove on a Friday, arriving in the late afternoon when the light was turning the red dirt a deep orange and the neem trees were casting long shadows across the road. Kofi recognized things from the window before Emeka could identify them. That corner, that tree, that bend in the road with the 3 stones at its edge. and narrated the approach in a low, continuous voice that was entirely for himself. The compound smelled of overwatered soil and the warmth that small enclosed spaces accumulate during the day and release slowly after sunset. The woman who had been managing things had placed the key on the lintel and gone. The garden was intact, mostly. The tomatoes needed the attention Adwoa had predicted. Kofi ran through to his room and came back with something he had left deliberately. A small notebook he had been keeping since he could write, in which he wrote observations about things he found interesting, mostly mechanical, with small careful diagrams in the margins. He held it up to show his father. Emeka said, "This is good work." Kofi said, "I am going to need a better notebook." Emeka said, "I will get you one." Kofi said, "A proper one. With blank pages, not lined. Lines interfere with the diagrams." Emeka said, "I know exactly the kind you mean." He said it so immediately and so certainly that Kofi looked at him for a moment and then nodded, satisfied, and went back to his room. Adwoa, standing in the doorway of the kitchen, had heard all of it. She said nothing. She went into her garden and she began to check on her plants in the particular way she checked on plants. Methodically from the left side, bending to look at each one from the right angle, pressing the soil with 2 fingers to test the moisture. She moved through the garden in the cooling evening air with the same focused composure she brought to everything, and somewhere in the middle of it she stopped moving and stood very still among the plants. Emeka came to the garden doorway. He did not go in. He stood in the doorway and watched her standing still among her plants in the early dark. After a moment she said, not turning, "You should come in here." He said, "I did not want to interrupt." She said, "You are not interrupting." He stepped into the garden. The soil was slightly soft under his shoes. He could smell tomato leaves and the pepper plant and the earth itself, turned and alive. She turned to look at him, and in the low light her face was clear in the way faces are clear in the evening, without the precision of daylight, but with something truer. She said, "I am not the same person." He said, "I know." She said, "You are not the same person either." He said, "I know that too." She said, "We are going to have to build something new. Not what we had. Not a restoration of that. Something new." He said, "Yes." She said, "That is harder than a restoration." He said, "Yes." She said, "I know you know that. I wanted to say it out loud because if it is only in our heads, it is not an agreement." He said, "It is an agreement." She looked at him. He said, "Adwoa, I watched them lower someone into the ground and I went home and I sat in that flat for 3 weeks and then I moved because the flat had the bakery window and I could not." She was very still. He said, "I have had 8 years to understand what it would mean to have you back. 8 years is enough time to understand that the harder thing is always worth doing if what is on the other side of it is real. I am not afraid of building something harder. I am afraid of nothing. I am afraid only of—" He stopped. She said, "What?" He said, "I am afraid of you deciding one day that what I am able to offer is not enough." She said, "Emeka." He said, "It is the one thing I am not able to engineer my way out of. Every other thing I have faced, I have found a way through it. But that one I cannot solve in advance. Can only—" She said, "Emeka, stop." She said, "You kept the plant for 8 years. He said, "Yes." She said, "You learned to explain engines to a boy you had never met in one afternoon." He said, "He is easy to teach." She said, "You called your mother on the first Sunday and told her the full thing without leaving anything out." He said, "How do you know I did not leave anything out?" She said, "Because I know you. Because I have always known you. Because knowing you has not required 8 years of daily contact." She said, "You have never, in all the time I have known you, offered anything that was not real." She took a step toward him. He did not move. She put her hand flat on his chest, the right side, where his heart was doing the thing it had been doing since the road. She said, "I am not going anywhere." He put his hand over her hand. He did not say anything. Some things are made worse by the addition of words. Above them, in the dark, the first stars were arriving over the village, and in the room beyond the garden Kofi was writing in his notebook with his particular focused attention, and the garden smelled of earth and something flowering that neither of them had planted and that had grown there anyway, on its own terms, in the time between one life and another. That evening, the 3 of them ate together at the small table in the compound. Adwoa had cooked. She had made the things she knew how to make in that kitchen, from the things still in the store, A straightforward meal, nothing elaborate, the kind of meal that a person makes for people they are no longer performing for. Kofi ate with the complete focus he brought to eating, not speaking until he had finished, and then he asked a question about the engine diagram he had been working on, and Emeka answered it, and Kofi asked to follow up, and the conversation moved through the question in the way good conversations move, unhurried, finding the interesting place in each turn. Adwoa watched them. She watched her son talk to his father with the specific ease that Kofi brought to things he had decided were right, and she watched her husband. She could still call him that. She had decided the word was still accurate to the legal fact and the fact of the heart. Listened to their son with the complete attention she had always loved most in him, the attention that left no part of the person speaking feeling unobserved. She thought about the 8 years. The specific texture of 8 years, not the broad shape of them, which she knew, but the texture. The winter morning 3 years in when the generator failed in the night and she had lain awake in the cold listening to Kofi breathe and felt the exact weight of being the only adult responsible for a small life. The evening she had made enough money in 1 month to clear 3 months of rent and had sat at her small table with the accounts in front of her and felt something warm move through her chest that she had recognized, after a moment, as pride. The afternoon Kofi came home from school and read her something from his notebook in a voice that was exactly his own. Not a child's performance but a person's expression of something observed carefully and understood truly, and she had understood that whatever else she had or had not managed, she had managed this. She thought about all of it and she thought, I am not sure the 8 years were only loss. This was not a comfortable thought. She did not pursue it far into the evening. But it was true, and she had made a practice of noticing the true things, and she noticed it. After dinner, Kofi cleared the plates without being asked. This had been the practice in this house. And then he came back to the table and looked at his parents. He said, Are we going to live here or are we going to live in the city? Emeka said, What would you prefer? Kofi said, I asked you first. Emeka said, We will divide our time. For now. We will see what works. Kofi said, Is that a real answer or a grown-up answer that means you have not decided yet? Emeka looked at Adwoa. Adwoa looked at Emeka. Something passed between them, the specific shared amusement of two people who have raised the same person and who recognize where this comes from. Emeka said, It is a real answer that also means we have not fully decided yet. Both things are true. Kofi considered this. He said, That is a fair answer. He pushed his chair back. He said, I am going to finish my diagram. He went to his room. The two of them sat at the small table in the compound with the sound of crickets starting up in the evening, and the smell of the garden coming through the open door, and the single light bulb above them doing its small, reliable work against the dark. Adwoa said, He is going to be something. Emeka said, I know. She said, I did not raise him to be impressive. I raised him to be specific, to care about the exact true thing. Emeka said, It shows. She said, You cannot take credit for it. He said, I am not taking credit. I am observing. She said, I know. They sat for another moment. She said, Thank you. He said, For what? She said, For coming to the village. I know what your schedule is. I know what it cost you. He said, Nothing I do for this family costs me anything I need back. She looked at him. He said it again without looking away. Nothing. In the months that followed, Emeka did something that surprised his board of directors and his logistics director and several journalists who tracked these things. He began spending Fridays outside the city. Not officially. Not announced. He simply started leaving on Thursday evenings and arriving back on Monday mornings, and the people who needed to reach him could reach him, and the work did not suffer, and the board, who were beginning to understand that the man they worked with was not reducible to the patterns they had assigned him, adjusted and said nothing. He spent those Fridays differently depending on the week. Sometimes in the village. Sometimes at a site related to a new project he was developing. A project that emerged directly from his visit to the distribution hub, a project his logistics director had not anticipated but had immediately understood, which involved building supply chain infrastructure in underserved areas and which Emeka took a personal interest in that was different from his usual operational interest. He visited sites. He met with community leaders. He sat in rooms where he was not the most important person and listened with the same complete attention he gave to his son. He had a reason for this that he did not fully articulate to anyone, including himself, until one Friday evening on the veranda in the village when Kofi was doing his homework and Adwoa was in the garden and the light was going orange over the neem trees. The reason was this: He had built most of his life on the assumption that building the largest and best version of the work was the same as building the most meaningful version of it. He had been half right. The scale mattered. The precision mattered. But he had been, in the years of grief, building partly from grief, building as a way of not sitting still, not letting the quiet arrive, not allowing the specific silence of a room where someone used to be audible. He was not doing that anymore. He was building from something else now. Something that had to do with Kofi asking questions about engines and Adwoa pressing her fingers into soil, and his mother arriving with a goosey she had dried herself and saying with complete certainty, "She kept herself." All that time, she kept herself. He was building from the knowledge that the things most worth having are the things that hold together under the full weight of real life. Not the life you arranged for yourself, but the life that actually happens, with its disappeared women and its hospital corridors and its 8 years of red dirt roads and its library books and its overwatered pepper plants. He was building from the specific truth that he had sat in a car on a Wednesday afternoon and looked at a boy through a windshield and felt something knock open in his chest that all his billions had not closed. There is something I have been turning over since I heard this story. Not a conclusion. A question I am still sitting with. The way you sit with a thing that will not resolve into something simple, that asks to be held rather than answered. Adwoa spent 8 years building something alone that she had not needed him to build. She built a life, a skill, a garden, a child. She built herself, again, from different materials than the first time into a different shape. Not a lesser shape, not a damaged shape, but a specific shape that could only have been made by those 8 years and not any other configuration of living. And I keep returning to that. Not because the story would have been better without the grief. Not because loss is good or separation is good, or the particular silence of a person who has been wrongly removed from a life they were supposed to be living is in any way bearable or justified or to be sought. But because of this, the woman who walked through that gate at the end of those 8 years was different from the woman who would have been there if none of it had happened. Stronger in different places. More certain about some things. More careful about others. And the man sitting in the back seat of the car, he was also different. He had been hollowed and had filled the hollow with something. And Kofi, who did not ask for any of it, who was born into the aftermath and who grew up in a small compound with a garden and a notebook and a mother who would not let him be anything other than specific and true, Kofi was entirely himself in a way that might not have been possible in the life that was supposed to happen. I do not know what to do with this. I do not think it is comfortable. I do not think it is meant to be comfortable. I think the most honest thing I can offer is this. Sometimes the thing that was supposed to be the end of everything is not the end of everything. And sometimes the version of yourself that survives the unsurvivable is the one who finally has access to the tools you needed all along, and could not have found any other way. I have been sitting with that since I heard this story. I expect I will sit with it for a while longer. And so I want to leave you with this. If you were separated from someone or something or some version of yourself, by circumstances you did not choose and could not control, and you kept building anyway in the small compound of whatever life you were given to work with, tending your plants, teaching your children to say the exact true thing, keeping yourself when everything else was unclear. What did you become in those years? And do you fully know the value of what you built?